great councilman of this great community, Andrew Blount.
Everybody, a round of applause for my beautiful wife, Michelle. Round of applause for Brian for putting this great event together. And one more for our fabulous food and the great staff that have helped out.
You are a team.
I gotta tell you, I've been listening for the last 45 minutes, and I want to meet this Andrew guy. He sounds great. I am really, really grateful to my friends for coming up and sharing. By the way, I got rid of the mic. For coming up and sharing a little bit of testimony with regards to me. I was humbled and embarrassed throughout most of it, but I thank you very much. It really means a lot to me. I have a vision for Laguna Hills. I have a vision that we can have a city that proactively listens to people, that proactively develops and engages our citizens in a process of making our city even better. I would like to have a city that nobody confuses Laguna Hills with all the other lagunas that are out there. Nobody confuses us with, gosh, I don't know where Laguna Niguel starts and Laguna Hills ends. I have no idea what's the difference about Lake Forest and Laguna Hills. I would like to have a city that stands out in its excellence. To get to where we are now, I'll say a couple of stories about where I began. And before I do that, I have to congratulate my son. Somehow he was able to snag a seat with Scott Baugh here and Barbara Kogerman. And I don't know if you're just looking around at name tag, son, but you're sitting next to Colonel Bill. And I'm very impressed. So I started out 39 years ago in a small place. When I was 2 years old, we moved to our first trailer home. It was a little single-wide trailer home in a tiny town of about 850 people. The trailer home was located on a little garden that was at the edge of a farm. That was a peach farm that my grandfather had owned. And my mom and dad had talked him into selling us this little plot of land with some payments, and they put a trailer house on it. And my dad worked at a water treatment plant, making minimum wage as a plant operator, and my mom had a garden. She grew that garden in order to be able to support our family. And I got to tell you, I was 5 or 6 years old. I was out there working in the garden, and I hated it. It was great that you learn how stuff grows, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't how I wanted to spend my life working in a garden. One day, my mom sends me out there to go ahead and hoe the tomatoes there in the garden, and not only did I hoe up the weeds, but I hoed up the tomatoes too. So it was at that point that I knew I needed a different life. And I was up at my grandmother's house, who had a beautiful house that was up in the woods. And I was watching on a black and white television, and there was a repeat of a speech that was on. We're talking 1979 now, and there was a repeat of a speech from about 10 years before of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was giving a fabulous address about Barry Goldwater on this black and white television, on this repeat that I happened to be watching. And in it, he talked about 3 things that were the greatest evils that were taking over America. And he talked about high taxes. He talked about big government. And he talked about subsidies. And Ronald Reagan at that time, as he was throughout the rest of his life, was against high taxes. And he was against subsidies. And he was against big government. And for whatever reason, when I was sitting there at 6 or 7 years old, that was the day that I became a conservative. That was the day that I started to believe that there was a way out of this mess that my parents were describing, and out of the troubles that we were having just as a family and trying to survive. And I started watching and I started listening at that point in time. About a year later, I started my first software company. I wrote software for the TRS-80 color computer, a Radio Shack computer. We had one gift that year for Christmas, or 2 years before before I'd started the business. And that was this Radio Shack computer. And my brother and I, we would share the computer. We'd have fights about it. But the thing was, while we had this computer, we didn't have any games for the computer. And so I'd get magazines, called Rainbow Magazine, and I'd type in programs out of the magazine. And when I did that, I would mess them up because, I was 6 or 7 years old. And so instead of the guy going left on the screen, he went right. Well, I started to debug the program to figure it out, and that's how I learned to write software. And when I was 8 years old, I started High Altitude Software, which was my first software company. And I got to tell you, working downstairs in a little basement that we built outside of this toy shed that we had, there was a little makeshift thing outside. That was a heck of a lot better than working outside in the heat in the garden. I figured out a way that I could actually make some money. Now, what was crucial about that is there weren't any regulations on an 8-year-old having a software company. I went by Andy at the time, and every now and then somebody would call and have a question on a piece of software that I sold, and I had a really, really high-pitched voice. They thought I was a woman. I went with it, because it's a lot better than telling them you're 8 when you're trying to extract a check out of them versus computer software. So, fast forward a number of years, and I end up in California, and I've been in Southern California for the last 20 years. To me, it was the land of milk and honey. It's the land of opportunity. And it's fabulous with the type of work that I do that I'm not heavily regulated. Most instances, and in Laguna Hills, you don't even need a business license. I don't have to have a use permit in order to be able to write computer software, which is an absolutely marvelous thing. But over these last 14 years that I've been in the South Orange County region, Michelle and I, we found a home about 4 years ago, and we found a home right here in Laguna Hills. This place is marvelous. I absolutely love Laguna Hills. I love my neighbors. We meet fabulous neighbors like Kenny and Lyda. It's amazing. There's a number of restaurants that I love to go to. I love its proximity, and I love its location. And back in 2009, Michelle and I, we started doing something that was a little unusual. We actually started in 2008, or she did. And it was this Christmas light thing that Kenny was alluding to earlier, which is actually how I got to know Kenny, was through the Christmas lights. And I tell you, many of the folks that I know now were from the lights. I'll tell you the story about that. So one day, we're at our home down in San Clemente before we moved up here to the great city of Laguna Hills. And Michelle was in charge of Christmas. And what that means is that she would, and I was a good husband, because what that means is she would have lots of boxes of Christmas stuff, and I would complain about them. I'd walk in there in July and say, why on earth is all this stuff in our garage? We can't possibly need all of this. And then some more would show up, and some more would show up. And so she's decorated the outside of the house, and there's a bunch of big bulbs and globes and all kinds of crazy things, and Snoopy's spinning around in a circle and those type of stuff. She's decorated, and she comes running into the house a week or 10 days before Christmas in a panic. Absolute panic. I said, sweetie, what's wrong? She says, well, the lights are off outside. Okay, have you checked the breaker? And she said, well, of course, dummy, I've checked the breaker. And for any of you that are married, you know that's a conversation that is only going downhill. So I walk out to the front. The outside of the house borders our living room, and I can smell burnt electrical. And I look down, and the plugs that nothing is plugged into are fried. I looked at her and I said, sweetheart, I said, not only are you not going to have lights tonight, you're never going to have lights again. And she has this look on her face, folks, I'll tell you the truth. She has this look on her face that if I don't get those lights back on in the next 30 seconds, she's either going to start crying or she's going to divorce me. So I went and ran some extension cords, got some LEDs, put some lights up in front. LED turns out takes a lot less power than the flying Snoopies do. Put a few things up in front of the house, and the next day, Alex, my next door neighbor who's 12, he comes over and he says, Andrew, I see you're putting some lights up. I said, yeah, what's it to you, Alex? He says, well, I'm going to put up more lights than you. I said, Alex, I can out-bankroll you on the $20 I have in my pocket right now. Okay, you're putting up more lights than me. And he says, okay, so he and I go down to Home Depot together. We buy some lights, we both do our houses, and it was a lot of fun. So fast forward a few months to early 2009, February of 2009, when we moved here. People remember the stock market was at the bottom of its bottom for the last 14 years. in March of 2009. People were losing their jobs, companies were closing, and here we were moving to this fabulous home in what I think is one of the premier neighborhoods in the entire United States of America. In a wonderful, wonderful city. We started looking at the front of the house, and Michelle and I started talking and said, I think we can do something neat. I think we can put up some lights that'll put a smile on people's faces. If somebody has a bad day at work, they can come by, and it's free, and there's not a lot of free things to do in Orange County. And I think it'd be something that's really neat. Not having any idea what the reception of it would be. And so we put up some lights, and she decorates the inside of the house for a Christmas party that we're having, as Hector had alluded to earlier. And so we put the lights up. We don't think much of it. People are coming by. It's kind of exciting. People are talking a little bit, and it's neat, and it certainly is putting some smiles on some people's faces. And then we have our Christmas party, and 2 nights after the Christmas party, my mother-in-law comes over, and she says, Andrew, let's go outside and let's watch the lights together. I said, well, if we're going to go watch lights, we've got to have some apple cider. And so we stop by the grocery store, and we get a couple gallons of apple cider, and we heat it up, and we go out and sit outside and put on a little stereo because our lights are all tuned to a radio station. And so we're sitting there, we're watching them, and people start showing up to watch them with us. I start looking around like, well, I'm drinking cider. Everybody should have cider. And so I go inside, and I brew up some more cider to bring it out. And next thing I know, my mother-in-law is talking to this family. And the family's trying to figure out what she's saying, and she's saying, the inside of the house is even better. The inside of the house is amazing. My daughter's done this great job. You got to come in and see it. And they're like, what on earth are you talking about? And then she goes and she takes this family and she drags them into our home to see what the inside looks like. And that's when we started touring the inside of the house. Last year, we toured just over 70,000 people through the house. We passed out 1,800 gallons of Christmas cider to people that came by. And that's good cider. We bring it in from Bigglesville, Pennsylvania. That's where they grow all the fabulous apples. And for us, it's become something amazing. Each night, you get different stories from folks that come by. One story that really touched Michelle and I's heart was there's this little boy, about 6 years old or 5 years old, and he's sitting on the shoulders of his dad. And they find Michelle at the front of the house, and it was a busy night. This was a 40-minute line queue or so to get into the house. It was a busy night. And they find Michelle at the front of the house, and this little guy with his Coke bottle glasses, he looks down at Michelle and says, this is the best thing I've ever seen. He says, I love Christmas, and I've never seen anything like this in my whole life. He says, you have these Christmas trees and decorations, there's so many lights. He says, it's totally amazing. I said, thanks. He says, thank you. And he's only 6. Thank you so much. And so he's got this huge smile on his face, and Michelle looks over at his mom. His mom's crying. And, it happens a lot because, one of the reasons we put them up is not everybody can afford to do something neat. We can, and so it works out well. We put time and effort into it, all that sort of stuff. But it works out okay, but that way, if somebody can't afford it, or they can't afford the lights, they can come by and see something that's neat, right? So she's expecting that answer. She says, sweetie, what's wrong? She says, we don't have any lights. We don't have a tree. We don't have decorations. We don't have anything on our house. And she's like, okay. And she says, the reason we don't is because we're at chalk every day with Carl. And we don't know if he's going to make it to the next day or not. And he has a series of different troubles that are plaguing his little body. And by then, my wife, she's crying. By then, the mom's still crying. The dad's crying. And here's Carl with these Coke bottle glasses and the biggest smile you've ever seen in your life. Just looking around at how great this is because it absolutely was one of his best days ever. And that's why we do it. Now, the funniest thing has happened over the last 3 years of doing this. We start to meet people in and around Laguna Hills, which otherwise we likely would have never met, like Kitty, for example, and many of our neighbors. And you start to listen to folks, and then you start to care about them, because you're interested in them and you're interested in their lives. And you find out that somebody has a restaurant, and if he could only have a guitar player on Fridays and Saturday nights and a little better signage, he'd be able to keep his restaurant open. But our city doesn't allow it for whatever reason. You find out about single moms that if they had any sort of after-school program like any of the cities surrounding us do, that they could be able to make their ends meet, yet our city doesn't do it. you find out that instead of spending money on things that would be important to residents, we instead do things like we spend $400,000 a year to be able to have our city manager employed. Between our top 3 staff, and we only have 27 people that actually work in our city, we spend over $1 million a year. $1 million a year. It's an absolute incredible amount of money, rather than providing services and doing things for our residents. And for me, my heart is with business. I didn't have, to mention before, a use permit or any sort of conditional occupancy or anything like that in order to have a software company. And you look at our city, and as much as I love it, you go to the city council meetings and you start listening, and you figure out why it is that there's 2 Best Buys on streets that we actually pay for, yet they're located in cities that aren't ours. There's one in Mission Viejo and one in Irvine, both on our streets, yet the tax revenue from those businesses doesn't come to Laguna Hills. And you figure it out, and the reason is because as a city, we believe that it's a privilege to be able to come to Laguna Hills to do business. And we just had one meeting on Tuesday, and there's a fabulous company that wants to come to Laguna Hills, and they have a trampoline room. And my son and I and our daughter Michelle, we go to one up in Costa Mesa called Sky High, and it's this giant room that has all kinds of trampolines. You can have dodgeball and bounce off the walls and jump into big pits of foam balls and all kinds of really neat stuff, right? And they want to be able to locate this trampoline room over on Furniture Row, which happens to be an area right here in Laguna Hills. And so they bring it up to the city, and the city gives them a list of 20 or 30 different restrictions that they're going to have to live by. A big old packet of stuff, right? And then they get to come to the city council with their hat in their hand, and they get to say yes, we promise we'll live by all of those restrictions. And then they get to get questioned on many of the restrictions, and oh, are you sure you're going to live by number 17? And oh, yes, sir, we're certain, Madam Mayor, we're going to live by number 17. And here's 2 guys that have somehow put together capital in this business right now, in this economy, to be able to start a company. Well, I applaud that. Here's 2 guys that have a vision for something that's working throughout our county, which is a fabulous place, and I applaud that. To me, I believe that our attitude is backwards. It should be us that is out recruiting businesses to come here. We should say to a company like the trampoline business, which we certainly approved, and we opened the gates and said, gosh, welcome to Laguna Hills. You may now do business here. They're bringing 54 new jobs to us. We should be thanking them for bringing 54 new jobs, and we should be finding other companies.
Yes, absolutely.
They're going to pay now, while they don't own the building, they're going to be paying for property taxes because there's a lease on the building, so they'll be subsidizing those property taxes on a private basis. That a portion of that's going to come to our city. We should be thanking them for paying those property taxes. They're going to pay for sales taxes. And sales tax is going to come through that business. It's going to come here, and we're going to be able to do great things in Laguna Hills with that money. And we should be thanking them for doing that. They're going to provide a fabulous facility and a fabulous place for us to go with our families and spend an afternoon to be able to enjoy that company and enjoy the camaraderie on something that's neat and interesting to do. And we should be thanking them for doing that. Laguna Hills can be proactive. Laguna Hills, as much as I love it, can be even better. Laguna Hills can be the Laguna that's separated from the other ones. So when people look down at South County, instead of saying, are you talking about Laguna Beach? They say, are you talking about Laguna Hills? That's my vision for the city. A city that's proactive, a city that listens. A city that listens to its businesses. Most importantly, a city that listens to its residents. I am humbled and grateful that everyone is here. I have met so many fabulous people out knocking on doors and the different meetings and events that we've been going to, and new friends and new company. If you do find it in your hearts to contribute, extremely grateful for it. It does turn out that it's darn expensive to run an election. We have 5 more mailers that are planned. We've got door knockers, all kinds of just crazy stuff that has to happen between now and election time. And I appreciate it. And I know you get hit up for stuff all the time. One thing that you can really do to help is when you guys are leaving, there's signs that are out in front. Take them. Cindy's got enough. Put one over at your house. And if you have some neighbors that you can tell about me, if you have some neighbors that you can share a new vision for Laguna Hills with, that would be absolutely marvelous, because we're going to win this, and we're going to make this the absolute best city in all of South Orange County. Thank you.